Empty the bag or leave in handcuffs. The ultimatum hangs in the suffocating silence of the elite art exhibit. Lewis Robinson, dressed in a sharp red suit, assumes the woman in denim is an easy target for his rage. He refuses to check the cameras, desperate to make a public example of her. He has no idea that every recorded insult is a nail in his career's coffin. The boss has arrived, and his career is at stake. This story is just getting interesting. If you support the fight against injustice and discrimination, then subscribe to this channel now and join the fight. I saw you hovering by the sculpture for 10 minutes. Lewis barked, his voice rising another notch to ensure the patrons near the back could hear. You didn't look at the placards. You weren't reading the history. You were just waiting for the floor staff to turn their backs. He let out a harsh, dry laugh that lacked any real humor. People like you only come in here because you think a place like this is an easy mark. You think because we're open to the public, you can just walk in and take what doesn't belong to you. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but Lewis cut her off before a single syllable could escape. Don't bother with the excuses. I've heard them all. You're looking for the exit, but you're not leaving until that bag is empty. He turned his head slightly, shouting toward the security station without breaking his gaze from her. Officer Vance, we have a code red at the bronze exhibit. Get over here now. The air in the gallery turned cold and heavy. Victoria looked around and saw the shift in the room. A woman in a silk dress pulled her purse closer to her side. A man in the corner stopped mid-sentence and pulled out his phone, the lens pointed directly at Victoria's face. She could feel the weight of a dozen different assumptions locking onto her, fueled entirely by Lewis's finger and the simple fabric of her shirt. Sir, you are making a very public mistake, Victoria said finally. Her voice was quiet, steady, and lacked the tremor of someone who was guilty. Lewis scoffed, his eyes scanning her from her sneakers up to her bun. The only mistake here was letting you through the front doors without a background check. You don't belong in a space like this, and we both know why you're really here. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his breath hitching with a sense of triumph. Now, are you going to hand over the piece, or do I have to let the police find it for me? The crowd didn't just watch, they swarmed. As Lewis Robinson's voice cracked with the strain of his accusations, the high-end atmosphere of the gallery shifted into something far more primal. Sloane Whitaker, a regular at these openings known more for her social standing than her art knowledge, was the first to bridge the gap. She didn't offer help or ask for context. She simply raised her gold-rimmed smartphone, the lens acting as a barrier between her and the humanity of the woman being shamed. Beside her, Elias Thorne, a man who prided himself on his curated digital life, adjusted his grip on his device to get a better angle of Victoria's face. To them, this wasn't a tragedy or an injustice, it was content. Victoria stood in the center of the growing circle, her leather backpack still gripped in one hand. She watched the glowing screens rise like a wall around her. The silence she maintained wasn't born of shock, it was a deep, weary disappointment. She saw the way their eyes flickered from her denim shirt to the aggressive red of Lewis's suit, and she could almost hear the mental boxes they were checking. In their minds, the man in the expensive tailoring was the protector of the culture, and the woman in the work shirt was the interloper. Look at her face, Sloane whispered, loud enough for her phone's microphone to catch it. She's not even denying it. The audacity of some people. Elias nodded, moving a step closer to capture the tremor in Lewis's pointing finger. He was already thinking of the caption, something about security breaches and maintaining standards. The digital jury was in session, and the verdict had been reached before a single piece of evidence was produced. Victoria's eyes moved slowly from one person to the next. She wasn't looking for a savior. She was observing the wreckage of their character. Every person filming was a witness who had chosen to be a judge instead. The air felt tight, filled with the quiet taps of screens and the hushed, judgmental murmurs of people who felt safe because they weren't the ones being pointed at. Victoria took a single, slow breath, her expression remaining as unreadable as the bronze sculpture behind her. She didn't plead. She didn't hide her face. She simply bore witness to their cruelty, waiting for the moment the lenses would have to turn away. Lewis didn't even glance toward the security booth or the computer terminal behind the desk. He didn't want the truth. He wanted a confession. He stepped closer to Victoria, his presence a physical threat designed to make her buckle. "I'm not wasting my time looking at cameras," he snapped, his voice tight and jagged. "I saw what I saw. You think you're clever, hiding behind that quiet act, but I know how this ends. You open that bag right now, or I'm letting the police handle the search in the back of a squad car." Victoria didn't move. She didn't reach for the zipper of her backpack, and she didn't lower her gaze. "If you check the footage from 10 minutes ago, you'll see I never touched the pedestal," she said, her voice a calm anchor in the middle of his storm. "It's a simple process, Lewis. Verify the facts before you escalate this further." Her use of his first name seemed to strike a nerve. He let out a sharp, mocking breath. "You don't tell me how to run my floor. You don't have the right to demand anything." He turned to the crowd, his arms wide as if inviting them to witness her defiance. "See? This is what they do. They stall. They try to talk their way out of it. But the clock just ran out." He turned back to her, his face inches from hers, his eyes narrowed into slits. "This is your last warning. Hand over the bag and the bronze piece inside it this second, or I'm giving the order to have you hauled off in cuffs. I won't ask again." The security guard, Officer Vance, shifted his weight, his hand resting near his belt, waiting for the signal. The silence in the gallery was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic clicking of the phone cameras still recording every second. Lewis stood there, his hand outstretched, demanding she surrender. He was so certain of his power that he didn't notice the way Victoria was looking at him, not with the panic of a thief caught in the act, but with the cold, calculated focus of a woman who was recording every one of his mistakes for a very different kind of record. She didn't reach for the bag. She simply stood her ground and waited for him to make the move he couldn't take back. Officer Vance didn't wait for a second invitation. He stepped into the tight circle, his boots thudding heavily against the floor, and placed himself directly between the two. He didn't draw his weapon, but his hand hovered near his belt, his eyes darting between Lewis's frantic face and Victoria's steady gaze. "All right, let's lower the volume," Vance said, his voice dropping into a practiced, authoritative rumble. "Ma'am, the manager here says you've taken a piece from the exhibit. I need you to cooperate and show me the contents of your bag right now." Lewis let out a sharp, triumphant huff. "Finally, just do your job, officer. She's been stalling for 5 minutes. Probably trying to figure out how to ditch it." He looked at the phone still recording, nodding as if to confirm to the digital audience that justice was finally arriving. Victoria didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or claim her rights. She simply looked at Officer Vance and nodded once. "I have nothing to hide, officer. But I want it noted that I am doing this voluntarily despite no evidence of theft." She slowly reached back, sliding the leather backpack off her shoulder. The movement was deliberate, almost clinical. As she reached into the main compartment, a collective breath seemed to be held in the room. Even the whispering stopped. Her hand emerged slowly, gripping a small, heavy object wrapped in a soft, gray protective cloth. The moment the shape appeared, a sharp gasp rippled through the crowd. Sloane Whitaker moved her phone closer, nearly hitting another patron in her rush to capture the reveal. To everyone watching, this was the smoking gun. The size and weight of the object perfectly matched the small bronze sculpture that had been the focus of Lewis's rage. "There it is," Lewis shouted, his voice cracking with a mix of excitement and vindication. "I told you. She has it. Officer, take her into custody immediately." Victoria ignored him. She looked directly at Vance and began to slowly unwrap the gray cloth. She wasn't acting like a thief caught in a lie. She was acting like someone unveiling a precious secret. As the fabric fell away, revealing the dark, metallic surface underneath. The tension in the room reached a breaking point. The crowd pressed in, their lenses focused on her hands, waiting for the final confirmation of her guilt. Victoria held the object out toward the officer. Her expression remains as calm and unreadable as ever. Silas Montgomery pushed through the heavy glass doors of the gallery, his mind already on the quarterly accusation report, but the wall of people blocked his path. He didn't see art. He saw a sea of glowing phone screens and heard the sharp, frantic barking of Lewis Robinson's voice. As he forced his way into the center of the room, Silas's professional composure vanished. He didn't just stop, he froze. His eyes locked on the woman standing in the middle of the circle, the one being pressured by a patrol officer and a screaming curator. The color drained from Silas's face so quickly it left him looking gray in the bright gallery lights. Lewis, blinded by his own sense of victory, didn't notice Silas's state. He turned to the director, his chest puffed out. "Silas, thank God you're here to witness this. I caught her red-handed. She actually had the nerve to hide the bronze piece in a cloth inside her backpack. I've already got the police involved." Lewis gestured toward Victoria with a sneer, expecting a pat on the back for his vigilance. Silas didn't look at Lewis. He didn't look at the officer. He could barely breathe as he took in the sight of Victoria Johnson, the woman who had signed his last 3 funding grants, standing there like a common criminal. He saw the gray cloth in her hand and the calm, terrifyingly steady look in her eyes. The silence that followed Lewis's outburst was broken only by the sound of Silas's heavy, uneven breathing. "Lewis," Silas finally whispered, though his voice lacked any strength. "Stop talking. Right now." Lewis blinked, his smile faltering. "What?" "Silas, she's a thief. I caught her. We need to get her out of here before." "I said be quiet." Silas's voice suddenly surged into a panicked roar that echoed off the high walls, startling the patrons and causing the officer to take a step back. Silas rushed forward, nearly tripping over his own feet to get to Victoria. He ignored the phones and the whispers, stopping a respectful distance from her, his hands trembling at his sides. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. The crowd watched, confused, as their heroic director began to physically shake in the presence of the woman they had spent the last 10 minutes filming. Silas swallowed hard, his eyes searching Victoria's face for any sign of mercy, but he found only a cold, professional disappointment that told him exactly how much this mistake was going to cost. Silas didn't wait for the officer to reach for the bronze object. He stepped directly into the space between them, his hand out, palm flat as if to physically stop the arrest. "Officer, stand down," Silas commanded, his voice shaking with a terrifying intensity. He turned to the crowd, his eyes wild and scanning the dozens of phones still pointed at Victoria. "Everyone, put your phones away. You have no idea what you're doing." Lewis Robinson stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion. "Silas, what are you doing? She has the sculpture. Look at her hand. We caught her." "You didn't catch anything, Lewis," Silas snapped, finally looking at the curator with a gaze that promised total destruction. He turned back to the room, raising his voice so it carried into every corner of the gallery. "This woman is not a thief. She is Victoria Johnson. She is the lead trustee of the Johnson Heritage Fund." He paused, the weight of the name hitting the room like a physical blow. The murmurs died instantly. The phone screens began to dip toward the floor. She is the sole reason this gallery is still open. She didn't just donate a piece. She literally funded the entire 10-year expansion project for this institution 3 weeks ago. Everything you see around you, the art, the walls, the very floor you're standing on, was made possible because of her. The silence that followed was absolute. Officer Vance's hand dropped from his belt as if it had been burned. He looked at Victoria, then back at the ashen-faced Silas, and slowly took 3 steps back, distancing himself from the manager. Victoria finally unwrapped the gray cloth the rest of the way. It wasn't the stolen bronze sculpture from the pedestal. It was a personalized, handcrafted bronze commemorative seal, a gift Silas had sent to her office just 2 days prior to mark her acquisition of the gallery's trust. She held it up, the light catching the engraved J at the center. "I came here to see the work I was told we were protecting," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the silence with a cold, sharp precision. She looked directly at Louis, whose mouth was hanging open, his face now a sickly, translucent white. "I wanted to see how this gallery welcomed the public when they didn't know a billionaire was watching. And I think I've seen exactly what I needed to see." The realization rippled through the patrons. Sloane Whitaker quietly slipped her phone into her clutch, her face flushing with a shame she couldn't hide. Elias Thorne stepped behind a pillar, suddenly desperate to be invisible. The woman they had spent 15 minutes documenting as a criminal was, in fact, the person who owned the very room they were standing in. Silas stood there, his head bowed, looking like a man waiting for a sentence to be passed, while Louis Robinson simply stared at Victoria, his knees visibly trembling as the magnitude of his mistake finally took hold. Victoria stepped toward Louis, her movements slow and deliberate, forcing him to meet her eyes. The curator tried to back away, but the crowd was a solid wall behind him, and he found himself trapped between the patrons he had tried to impress and the woman he had just tried to ruin. Victoria didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet intensity of her words carried further than his screams ever had. "Tell me, Louis," she began, her voice steady and chillingly calm. "In all your years working among these masterpieces, have you ever actually looked at them? Or do you just spend your days calculating the insurance premiums?" Louis tried to swallow, his throat clicking in the silence. "Ms. Johnson, I was only trying to protect the collection. I thought." "You didn't think," Victoria interrupted, her tone sharp as a scalpel. "You reacted. You looked at my clothes, you looked at the color of my skin, and you decided I was a threat to your curated little world. This gallery is filled with art that explores the depth of the human condition, the struggle for dignity, and the beauty of the unseen. But standing here today, it's clear that none of it reached you." She gestured vaguely toward the sculpture behind him, then back to his trembling hands. "Does a piece of bronze have more value to you than the person standing in front of it? You claim to be a gatekeeper of culture, but you don't even understand the most basic element of it. Respect. You didn't see a patron. You didn't see a human being. You saw a price tag that you didn't think I could afford, and you decided that gave you the right to strip me of my reputation in front of a dozen cameras." Louis opened his mouth to offer another hollow apology, but Victoria held up a hand, silencing him instantly. The patrons who had been filming only moments ago now looked down at their feet, the weight of her words hitting them just as hard. "The art on these walls is meant to expand the mind," Victoria continued, her gaze never wavering from his. "But your mind has clearly stayed very small. You've spent so much time worrying about the value of the objects in this room that you've completely forgotten the value of the people who walk through those doors. You looked at a woman in a denim shirt and saw a thief, but when you look in the mirror tonight, I want you to ask yourself what kind of person you saw in me, and what that says about the man staring back at you." Louis stood paralyzed, his face a ghostly white, unable to find a single word to defend the narrow, prejudiced world he had built for himself. The confrontation wasn't just about a false accusation anymore. It was an autopsy of his character, performed in front of the very audience he had tried to lead in a public shaming. Victoria didn't look angry. She looked profoundly disappointed, which was a far more devastating blow to a man who lived for status. Silas didn't wait for Victoria to ask for a resolution. He turned toward Louis Robinson, his face twisted in a mixture of fury and absolute exhaustion. The authoritative mask the curator had worn all morning had completely dissolved, leaving behind a man who looked small, panicked, and utterly defeated. "Louis, give me your keys and your badge," Silas said, his voice flat and final. "You're done here." Effective immediately, Lewis gasped, his hands flying to his chest as if he'd been struck. "Silas, wait. I was just following protocol. I was protecting the gallery's interests." "Surely you can't mean." "I mean exactly what I said," Silas interrupted, cutting through the excuses like a knife. "You didn't protect the gallery. You humiliated a guest. You ignored every standard of professional conduct, and you exposed your own deep-seated prejudices for the entire world to see. There is no protocol that justifies what you did today. You are a liability to this institution and everything it stands for." The room remained deathly quiet. Officer Vance, who had been ready to put Victoria in handcuffs just minutes prior, now stepped forward with a very different purpose. He looked at Silas, then at Victoria, offering a brief, shame nod of apology before placing a firm hand on Lewis's shoulder. "Come on, Mr. Robinson," Vance said quietly. "Let's go." Lewis looked around the room, his eyes searching for a single friendly face, but he found none. Sloane Whitaker and the other patrons who had been egging him on only moments ago now turned their backs or looked at the floor, desperate to distance themselves from the man they had just been filming. There was no digital army to save him now. The very phones that had been his weapons were now recording his own walk of shame. As Vance led him toward the exit, the only sound was the rhythmic thud of their shoes against the floor. Lewis's head was bowed, his bright red suit now looking garish and absurd in the light of his disgrace. He passed by the bronze sculpture he had accused Victoria of stealing, a silent witness to his downfall. When the heavy glass doors finally closed behind him, a collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the gallery, but the air remained thick with the lingering scent of a lesson learned too late. Silas stood by Victoria's side, his shoulders slumped, watching the street through the glass as his lead curator was escorted away, leaving the gallery in a silence that was no longer suffocating, but deeply reflective. Victoria adjusted the strap of her leather backpack and looked at the faces that remained in the gallery. The air was different now. The frantic, hungry energy of the crowd had been replaced by a heavy, contemplative stillness. Silas stood beside her, his head still partially bowed, while the junior staff members clustered near the back, their eyes wide and their posture defensive. They were waiting for a lecture, or perhaps a mass firing. But Victoria simply let the silence stretch for a moment, making them sit with the reality of what had just happened. "This gallery exists to hold up a mirror to the world," Victoria said, her voice carrying easily through the quiet room. She didn't look at Silas. She looked at the young woman behind the information desk who had watched the entire ordeal without moving a muscle. Art is supposed to be a bridge. It's supposed to be the one place where your background, your clothes, and your bank account don't determine your right to be here. If we lose that, we aren't a gallery anymore. We're just a warehouse for expensive things. She paused, making eye contact with a couple of the patrons who hadn't yet scurried away. Art is for everyone. It belongs to the person who walks in off the street to find inspiration just as much as it belongs to the person who can afford to buy the whole building. But prejudice? Prejudice is for no one. It has no place in this institution, and as long as I am involved, it will not be tolerated. Not in a whisper, and certainly not in a shout. Silas cleared his throat, his voice thick with regret. "I promise you, Victoria, things will change. From the ground up." "I know they will, Silas," she replied, her tone firm but not unkind. "Because they have to." She didn't wait for a formal apology or a round of applause. She had said what was necessary. Victoria turned away from the bronze exhibit and the hushed whispers, walking toward the front of the building. As she pushed through the heavy glass doors, the climate-controlled stillness of the gallery was replaced by the honest, unfiltered heat of the Houston afternoon. The sidewalk was crowded with people from all walks of life, none of whom knew she was a billionaire or a benefactor. To them, she was just another woman in a denim shirt heading toward her next destination. She took a deep breath of the humid air, feeling the weight of the morning lift. She hadn't come for the bronze commemorative seal in her bag. She had come to see if her investment was in good hands. Now she knew what work needed to be done. Victoria blended into the moving crowd, disappearing into the sunlight, leaving behind a gallery that was finally starting to understand the true value of what it held inside. The street outside the gallery was loud and indifferent, a sharp contrast to the stage perfection inside. As Victoria walked away, she didn't look back. She knew that walls can be rebuilt and curators can be replaced, but the dignity of a human being is much harder to restore once it's been broken for the sake of a viral video. That morning, the people in that room learned that the most valuable thing in a gallery isn't the bronze on the pedestals or the oil on the canvases. It's the character of the people who stand before them. Respect isn't a luxury reserved for those in suits. It's a basic human right that costs nothing to give but everything to lose. If this story reminded you that true value is found within, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps us continue sharing stories that challenge perspectives and celebrate the truth. Tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from? We'd love to know how far these lessons are traveling. Thank you for watching, and remember, never judge a book or a benefactor by their cover. See you in the next story.